Yükselen ekonomilerde kadın girişimcinin yükselen gücü, umut veren topraklar, umut veren kadınlar başlıklı ikinci ana oturumumuzu başlatmak üzere şimdi moderatörümüzü ve konuşmacılarımızı sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Uganda Ulusal Ticaret ve Sanayi Odası Direktörü Gloria Turye-Mureba. Alkışlarınızla Mureba'yı sahneye davet ediyoruz. You can take whichever seat you want to see. Alive Business Consultants kurucusu ve yönetim kurulu başkanı Hala El-Barkuki'yi de sahneye davet etmek istiyoruz. Sanofi Afrika İş Geliştirme Direktörü Amy Nyumbu Nidau Fall. Alkışlarınızla sahneye davet etmek istiyoruz. Institute for Strategic and Development Studies Anonim Şirketi Başkanı Carolina Hernandez. Yine alkışlarınızla sahnedeki yerini alıyor. Moderatörümüz İletişim ve Medya Danışmanı, eğitmen, televizyon programcısı Doktor Sedef Kabaş. Sedef Hanım'ı da alkışlarınızla yine yerine almak istiyoruz. Hoş geldiniz. Sözü sizlere bırakıyorum.
Merhaba. Şimdi bir önceki konuşmaları da keyifle izledik. Zaten Meral Hanım'ın olduğu bir oturumun sıkıcı olması mümkün değil. Gerçekten çok anlamlı ve düşündürücü şeyler söylediler. Şimdi sabahtan itibaren tahmin ediyorum birçok konuya değinildi. Ama bu panel biraz hani Gülden Hanım özellikle mi yaptı bilmiyorum ama en zor panellerden bir tanesi. Niçin? Çünkü kadın var, girişimcilik var, ekonomi var ama en önemlisi umut var. Şimdi bu panelde biz sadece sorunları değil, biraz da umutları aslında ne yapmaya çalışacağız? Yeşertmeye, canlandırmaya çalışacağız. Evet, sorunlar var, birçok yaşadığımız problemler var ama acaba umut da var mı? Ve bu ülkelerde yaşanan olaylar sonrasında umutlar yeşeriyor mu ve belki de burada yaşananlar bizim Türk kadınları için de bize örnek olabilir mi diye böyle bir bakış açısıyla ben açıkçası yönetmek istiyorum. Şimdi biraz internasyonel bir panel bu. Birbirinden değerli, farklı ülkelerden gelmiş iş kadınlarımız, akademisyenlerimiz var. Şimdi Carolina Hernandez'le başlayayım ben. Carolina, kendisi Filipinler Üniversitesi'nde politik bilimler Fahri Profesörü. Aynı zamanda Stratejik ve İş Geliştirme Enstitüsü Başkanı. Bir çarpıcı özelliği daha var Carolina'nın. 5 çocuk ve 5 torun sahibi. Yani Carolina kariyer de yaparım, çocuk da yaparım diyor. Hemen bakıyorum. Emi ile çok çalıştık çünkü Emi'nin en çok çalıştık bir kere ismi üzerine çok çalıştık. Değil mi Emi? Emi Nyumbu Nidau Fall. Is that the right way? Emi? Did I pronounce it the right way? It's okay. Emi Sub-Saharan Afrika, yani daha çok Batı Orta Afrika diye tanımladığımız bölgede, ki bu bölge 20 ülkeyi içine dahil eden bir bölge. Sanofi'nin bütün bu bölgelerden sorumlu iş geliştirme direktörü. Dolayısıyla sadece Senegal'le ilgili değil, aslında bütün bu Afrika'nın bu bölgesiyle ilgili değerlendirmelerini de paylaşacak bizimle. Ve kendisi bir doktor aynı zamanda ve Senegalli Kadınlar Medikal Doktorları Derneği'nin de başkanı. Hoş geldin diyoruz Emi'ye de. Ve hala aslında daha yakın bir yerden geliyor, Mısır'dan. İsmi Hala El Barkuki, exactly like the bar of cookies. İş dönüşüm yönetim uzmanı ve Amerikan Ticaret Odası üyesi ve aynı zamanda bu odaya bağlı Kadın Komitesi Başkanı. Tabii tahmin edebileceğiniz gibi Mısır'da şu anda çok ciddi değişimler yaşanıyor. Bu değişimlere paralel kadınların yaşadıklarını bizimle paylaşacak hala. Kendisine hoş geldiniz diyoruz. Ve Gloria Uganda'dan geliyor. Gloria Turya Mureba. Texas Üniversitesi İşletme Fakültesi'nde muhasebe ve ekonomi eğitimi görmüş. Ve Uganda Ulusal Ticaret ve Sanayi Odası Direktörü ve 14 yıldır iç mimari ve turizm alanlarında başarılı bir iş kadını olarak çalışıyor. Gloria'ya da hoş geldin diyoruz. Ve önce umut veren kadınlarımıza güçlü bir alkış istiyorum. Ta nerelerden gelmişler. Şimdi umutlardan önce biraz gerçekleri konuşalım. Şöyle bir baktığımızda Mısır dedik. Haberlerden çok yakından takip ettiğimiz gibi Mısır'da ciddi bir değişim yaşanıyor. İşte hükümet kurulmaya çalışıyor. Anayasa taslağı üzerinde ciddi tartışmalar oluyor Mısır'da bugün. Öyle ki kadınlar daha fazla haklara sahip olma mücadelesi değil, belki de kadınlar sahip oldukları hakları koruma mücadelesi vermek durumundalar bugünkü Mısır'da. Çünkü Türk kadınları bunu çok iyi bilecek. Şeria ile ilgili bazı hükümleri geri getirme gayretleri var. Bugünkü Mısır'ın siyasi ortamında. Şimdi bu noktada halanın değerlendirmelerine gerçekten çok dikkat etmek istiyorum. Nasıl bakıyor bir kadın olarak, başarılı bir iş kadını olarak bütün bu mücadeleye? Yani bırakın yeni haklar elde etmeyi, var olan hakları koruma mücadelesine.
Egypt is going through a very critical.
Could you please use a microphone, just to make sure that your voice will be heard?
I was saying Egypt, as you all know, is going through a very critical path. This is what change should be. So let me start. Is this fine?
Let us get it a little closer,
Okay.
just to make sure your voice is
So-
clear now.
So just before I get into the details of what's going on, what's happening is real change. I mean, if it was going to continue to be the very civilized demonstration in Tahrir Square and followed by the peaceful stepping down of President Mubarak, this wouldn't be real. This is a true dictatorship since the pharaonic ages. So if change has to happen, it has to be real. And for real, there is a price to pay. So the price was that more radical ultra-Orthodox faction of society has managed to have a voice and an influencing voice. And right now, there is a constituent assembly that is drafting the new constitution for Egypt. And they're trying the ultra-Orthodox faction of society that have been largely represented in the Constituent Assembly as a result of sweeping victory in the first parliament elections post the old regime, as a result of their extreme organization having been underground for so many years. They were able to quickly bring in the necessary votes to the voting stations and got an exceptionally high unrepresented majority, societal representation majority to the parliament, leading into a majority in the Constituent Assembly, leading into ultra-Orthodox ideas of imposing not just the principles of Sharia, but they go as far as wanting to implement the judgments of Sharia, where women are concerned, meaning that you can go back to a judgment 1400 years ago, and that could be the basis of a ruling in a certain case in front of court. So there is a big societal discussion right now, and I expect that the liberal, the minority liberals represented in the Constituent Assembly will probably step down if they're unable to make the changes, and we will not give in. We are men and women, by the way, in that regard, because it's not only about women. It's many other articles of the new constitution.
Hala, at that point, I will really would like to know, like all these discussions concerning women issues, mostly being discussed by men in Turkey. I wonder whether it's the case in Egypt. Are women also taking a hand off for the struggle to at least preserve their rights?
You know, what's interesting, at the time of demonstrations and the revolutions, women from all walks of life, at all ages, were very well represented. At the time of elections, women were, they had the highest turnout. But where there is a choice of a committee, women are not represented at all. I mean, in the Constituent Committee, I think we have maybe 4 women or 6 women, some of which are brought in by the Muslim, the Islamic factions. So there's no representation, in other words. It's a serious time, it's a challenge. We are for preserving the little we had, and what needs to be done is achieve a lot more, as I will demonstrate to you in my talk. Would you like me to just move forward?
Let me proceed with Gloria. Gloria, the news from Egypt is not that good, but I wonder what is the case in Uganda. What I have read so far concerning the Ugandan tradition and the lifestyle, like I got some of these notes, let me just find about them, and let me correct if I'm wrong. In terms of traditions, for example, women's role clearly is defined to be a subordinate of men in general terms. And also, these things we are also very familiar. I mean, don't take me like someone talking from the European side. I mean, in rural areas of Turkey, we are very familiar this type of traditional lifestyles as well. For example, women just stick to obey the wishes of fathers, brothers, husbands, and so on. Like the typical traditional roles that women are expected to aspire. So I wonder whether there has been any change, because as far as I know, you have just celebrated the 15th anniversary of your independence. So I wonder whether through this 50 years of journey, whether there has been any change in respect to the role of women in your country.
Thank you, Sadaf. As you rightly put it, we just celebrated 50 years of independence from the colonial rulers. Yes, we have come a long way, just like most other rising economies, especially when it comes to women. We have had one president for the last 26 years, and before that we had 4. In the period of the 24 years, there was only one female minister in Uganda. Ever since 1986, when President Museveni took over, we have seen a gradual increase of women in power, both politics and economics, to the level where today 35% of parliamentarians are women and 32% of the cabinet is women. Some of the highest jobs in Uganda are held by women, including having a vice president for 8 years who was a woman. Currently, the Speaker of Parliament is a woman. That is on the political side. On the economic side, yes, you're right. The traditional roles of a woman were in the kitchen, to be a mother, and those kind of chores from the house. But educating the girl child, which is what has been happening for the last 20 or 30 years, has significantly changed the way women are looked at and the roles women partake. Yes, they are still the traditional homemaker, but in addition to that, they are also income earners. In general, women spend 90 to 92% of their income on their home, unlike the men. And so ever since the women got into occupations like men, doctors, engineers, architects, you find that the household earns much more and lives a better life because of the income of the woman. We still have a way to go, but Uganda in particular, on the continent, has come a very long way because, again, of the leadership, and two, the diversity of our people has also helped. Uganda has 35 tribes. We are 34 million people, but with 35 tribes who are totally different from one another. If 10 Ugandans walked in here, you'll not think we come from the same place.
Do you think the education kind of played the role of a cement to form a unified society? And in this terms, maybe you can also change the mentality in terms of women's rights?
Absolutely. Education played a very big role. But education as is, without political leadership, wouldn't have transformed the role of women as far as it has. So you need a bit of both. And as long as we continue at the pace at which we are going, I'm sure in a few years we'll have a female president, because in Uganda there is no glass ceiling. If you can do the job, you can do the job.
Interesting.
And you'll earn exactly as your male counterpart.
That was interesting that, as you say, there's no glass ceiling.
No.
Okay. Let's proceed with Amy. Amy, you can either talk on behalf of Senegal, or you can also talk in general terms concerning the sub-Saharan African countries in terms of, to give us a general picture of the status of women in that part of the world.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the talk. And I want to thank Sanofi Turkey, which invited me in this important conference. What I can say, for my opinion, woman opinion, is that I have an optimistic view on Africa, because the continent have a huge potential.
Amy, could you just make the mic get a little closer?
But economic progress, economic and growth and progress are still slow and unequal, particularly for access to education and for access to health, and particularly for the poorest in the most remote rural areas. And women are those who suffer from this situation, who suffer the more from this situation. In Africa, what I can say is that some things are changing. A woman's situation is changing, because we struggle a lot, and I think that women now understand the power they can have when they go into network and when they go into association to define their own situation. And if I take example in Senegal, we have got, after several decades struggle, that the law establishing the absolute parity between men and women in all institutions is totally and partially elected by the National Assembly past May 14, 2010. And I think it's something very important. And we try to follow, and we try we have set an observatory so that the law be truly and effectively applied. And if you follow the news coming from Africa, you can, for example, see what's happening in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, with the past elections. And in Senegal, when the last president tried to to stay again in his position and trying to change the constitution, the population was stand up, and women are in the front to fight again this situation in Africa. So I think that we can say that we have long way to do, but now things are changing in Africa for women's situation.
When you look at these countries, like overall 20 countries in the sub-Saharan African countries, is there any of a country which really strikes out of these 20 countries, like which has done a lot of work in terms of to improve the status of women?
Yes.
Any of these out of this 20 country, like one example, at least a good example?
Mm-hmm. Ghana is a good example. Because,
Ghana.
Yes, Ghana is a good example for fighting women's conditions. Senegal is a very good example because they are really committed in this kind of struggle. And I think that I can give this example because women are stand up and really fighting for this, for their conditions, and they have results. Not only fighting, but they start having outcomes.
Okay, I believe you travel a lot around around these countries, like from one country to another. Like, in contrast, is there a country which you consider a kind of hopeless case, a very bad example, that we should be cautious about their policies?
I think that they are all trying to change, really. And what is important in Africa, that what I say, that creating network between countries. And, you know, sometimes there is a wrong understanding of religion. Because some countries...
Exactly, that was what I was looking for, like the traditions, the religion, the economy.
Yes.
If it's like so-called a Muslim country, is there like we should have more concerns? Or if a country which has a scarcity of resources, so have a very poor economy, so this gets also reflected on the issues of women and etc.
The poorest countries are the ones who have really problem to change the situation of their country and to leave women having a leadership position. That's true. But for religion problem, you know, it's sometimes people have a wrong lecture of what is said in religion. We are not here to discuss about religion, but I think that men use this kind of situation that to make women in the bottom of the pyramid. But I think it's a wrong thing, and now women understand that and try to be organized and try to be in a leadership position. And what is important in Africa is that we are obliged to go through education, because the most problem of our country is education. Most of women are not educated.
All right. Let's proceed with Carolina. To my surprise, the Philippines is another example. Is an example where it's one of these, let's say, developing countries, also being regarded a growing economy, but it's also a country where women, compared to many other countries in this category, has a saying in the society. For example, when I look at my notes, I found this interesting information. Leonard Wood, Governor General of the Philippines during the Spanish regime, He says, in the Philippines, the best man is the woman. So this really shows that, or at least describes the country as a nation of strong women. I mean, as far as I know, women have a kind of saying in ruling the country, or at least in the family unit, in the government. So I really wonder, what is your evaluation of your country in this regards? How did you achieve this?
Okay, thank you very much. And before I answer your question, I shall be a good Asian and thank Kadegir for having me here, and in particular also to enable me to come here. I would like to thank my friend Colin Durkop from Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. It's amazing, this experience that I have. I am so energized by the dynamism of Kadegir and all the women that, and men also, that are here. We have a reputation of women, you know, really being strong and stuff like that. And it did not come overnight, because even during the period of fighting the Spaniards, you know, we were under Spain for 400 years. So we became Roman Catholics for the most part. And then we were under the Americans for 50 years.
Yes.
The Spaniards made us into Roman Catholics, and the Americans wanted to make us into Protestants. So now we have both Catholics and Protestants in the Philippines. But women had fought side by side with men in my country, you know, even during the colonial period. And also, in the Philippines, the men give the salary to the wife. So you know who holds the purse has a strong power over how the money will be divided.
But that's the question. How did
it
happen?
happen?
I mean, what are the roots of this type of tradition or this type of lifestyle?
Okay. You know, because they had a role in fighting the colonial powers. They fought side by side with men. So after the colonial period came to an end, they had to come forward, and they came forward and assumed the role that is rightfully theirs.
And remind the men that we fought together.
Yes, yes. At the same, yes, that's right. At the same time, many of them, when the American period came and public education was given to all the Filipinos by the Americans, the women were there. My mom, for example, was part of the first group of teachers, you know, that they taught, you know, and they did not even finish their regular college education. They started teaching right away, and they also multitask, you know, like they were homemakers, but at the same time they were earning a living. They were caring for their children and all of those things. Okay, so but at the same time, now that I heard the Ugandan story, I really envy the Ugandan story, because Gloria said that there are no glass ceilings that they had to break. In the Philippines, we also had to break certain glass ceilings, because you know, people tell us, don't judge a book by its cover, because you need to go inside. And I'm telling this story because it's important to answer your question in a very indirect way. You know, when you look at the laws in the Philippines, they are not very good for women. You know, like laws about infidelity. They are so easy. It's so easy to convict a woman for infidelity to her husband than it is for a husband to be convicted of infidelity in relation to the wife. So it's very male-oriented. After all, we were under the Spaniards for 400 years, and the laws that we adopted were Napoleonic laws. So basically, very macho, yeah. And even in terms of property rights, women did not really have it. So you have a dual situation where, yes, outside, you know, the outside behavior, we were free and equal to the men, but there were certain legal constraints. And also, we did not have divorce for the longest time. Up to now, we don't have divorce laws. You know, we have annulment. It is a myth. It's a myth because annulment is like, of course it follows the canon law, you know. Annulment will take place if there are certain conditions, and one of the most common conditions is psychological incapacity. So, psychological incapacity doesn't mean that you are psychologically incapacitated with every guy or every girl or every woman or every man, as the case may be. You are only psychologically incapacitated in relation to a specific person who happens to be your spouse, you know. And when you successfully go for an annulment, it's as though the marriage did not take place. So you can marry again. And the children are legitimate because we care for our kids. We care for our children. So they're legitimate. They are entitled to the same inheritance rights that, you know, legitimate children enjoy. Okay, that's one thing. But at the same time, over time, you know, we broke certain glass ceilings, such as certain careers, certain degrees in college were traditionally reserved for men, like the legal profession, engineering professions, and things like that. I had wanted to be a lawyer, but I was told, oh, if you are going to be a lawyer, you know, the male lawyers will humiliate you in court because they will say all kinds of they will use language that is not appropriate to be heard by ladies. So I decided, oh, okay, then I will try to become a diplomat instead, and I will just marry a lawyer, and I did. Yeah. But we have broken that ceiling, you know, in terms of now you have more female lawyers, and you have an increasing number of female engineers and stuff like that. But let me say that we have had 2 female presidents in the country, yes.
Yes.
So we had both of them, however, were subjected.
Did they make a big difference having female presidents?
It made a lot of difference because both of them were subjected to coup attempts by the military.
Yes.
The male presidents never had to face any coup attempts, but 2 female presidents faced coup attempts. Both of them survived. So they made a difference.
Yes.
They made a difference in the sense that they show that even if the military would try, or parts of the military would try to bring them down, they would still survive. And Cory Aquino, the first female president, was a very hesitant president.
She didn't want to be even a candidate. She was just
didn't
forced
want to be a
into the
candidate.
politics.
But all the male opposition members to Marcos would not yield to other males. They would only yield to a woman because they thought that they could sort of outmaneuver her. But at the end of the day, she survived. She turned out to be more than just a housewife, which was how she was depicted, and so on. And the second female president was Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who also suffered from coup attempts. Whereas Cory was seen as a legitimate in the sense that even if it was extra-constitutional, she had popular support. But in the case of Mrs. Arroyo, a lot of opposition people thought that she came to power illegitimately. But she survived not only the term that she inherited from her predecessor, which was 3 years, and her own 6 years, so she served for 9 years.
Yes, this is very important, very crucial, but you know, in many countries, including maybe even Turkey, the role of women in political life is mostly considered to be a showcase. Like they're being elected and they take seats in the parliament, but so what? They don't have the attempt or at least the power to issue any policies in favor of women. I wonder whether that was the case in the Philippines, but as far as you said, it's a different picture, what you experienced, what you have gone through. Yes. Right?
And Mrs. Aquino...
So it went beyond the showcase.
Yes. Mrs. Aquino effected the family law, which enabled the annulment. It's a euphemism for divorce, but you know, we're a Catholic country.
Yes.
But the family law was...
Another burden.
Yes. The family law was adopted during her time.
Okay.
So a lot of women were able to avail of that.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. Now, we are very happy to have you here as our guest speakers. You have gone through a big journey, a long journey, because we're talking about the problems in these countries, developing countries. As you nicely summarized the issues in your country, it's so difficult to put them aside and to pursue a struggle and then at the end become a very successful professor, a successful doctor, successful businessman. So I wonder, how did you make it? For example, Hala, how did you make it? What was your personal journey through all these problems or struggles?
Mine was an interesting one because I actually studied journalism.
Make it a little closer.
I studied journalism and I wanted to work as a journalist, but at the time I graduated, journalism was controlled by the state and there was a lot of censorship. And you know how...
This sounds a little familiar, right?
You know how young people are, and it's a matter of ideology and principle.
Yes.
What you say will not be censored. So at the time, banking began, and the new American banks came to Egypt on the promise of growth and economic success. So I was hired by one of the banks, Chase Manhattan Bank, and that's how I had my career. Now, in banking in Egypt, women make it all the way to the second from the top position, not the top, but the second from the top, which is a big advancement to the rest of the industries in the country. So it was not that of a big challenge. The real challenge is in the private sector. Once you're
in the private sector?
Yes.
Business life?
Business, not in multinationals, not in large institutions. If you're trying to develop your own business, and this is where you come face to face with the realities of being a woman or not in the very small club at the very top, you know, which I believe is the same anywhere in the world. So my personal experience has been a very lucky one. I did not have to face what my counterparts in other industries had to face.
So in this respect, are you being considered a kind of role model?
I'm not personally considered a role model, nor our societies accept women to become role models. And by the way, this is all very recent. This was not the case in Egypt. This is a new trend that is growing very fast in the Arab and Muslim world. In the Arab Muslim world, not in the Muslim world, because Malaysia and Indonesia are not doing the same. But in the Arab Muslim world, we're going towards a much more...
So all these uprisings,
Yeah.
all these fights for the sake of democracy or to become a more democratic country is on the screens, on this TV news and everything, but behind the scenes there is another struggle going on in Egypt.
Yeah, it's, you know, the changes are real, and I think it's very positive. And one of the problems in our societies is the rising ultra-Orthodox Islam that is trying to take control. And that is another fight that we have to fight, and I think it's very positive. In fact, if you compare the challenges that Egypt was going through from the point of view of a woman prior to the revolution, barring the fact that I happened to work in an industry that had a lot of women working in it, was that women were given a very small role that looks very nice, like window dressing, and you had no chance otherwise. Right now, everything is being fought, so I believe there's a very good opportunity for society, including women, to improve.
Well, imagine you are the girls or daughters or your grandmothers were like Cleopatra and Nefertiti.
Hatshepsut.
So actually, traditionally, women should have a more say in ruling the country. But today...
Yes. women still continue to have a very big say. I mean, women are either in the forefront or from the back seat, guiding the policies and guiding the management. It still is the case. Women are a very powerful component in the Egyptian society. Right now we're taking a back seat, but still managing. Yeah.
Okay. Amy, how was your journey? You become a doctor and...
I'm very proud to be a woman. Because I think that sometimes I'm thinking that if I were a man, maybe my life won't be so exciting. Because
Yeah, then you will not be facing all these challenges, for sure.
yes, that's the challenge is interesting, men think that we are always in conflict with them. That is not the question. I think that what we need as women is to succeed in what we are doing. Our role like a wife, a good wife, woman, good mother, and succeed in our job. For me, maybe I have a chance because I working with a very good company, which is Sanofi. And Sanofi is one of companies involved in the women's employment and women's empowerment. And they really invest, they have a policy for that. And this is very important because they give us our chance to be a leader in the company. I have a lot of different positions in the company. I've been working for Sanofi 16 years ago. So why? Because it's interesting, because I think that I have possibility to upgrade and to have leadership position. And my journey is working for Sanofi with a big challenge because I'm leading a very important department, business development, and for Africa it's really important because business development have to find policies and strategy which answer to the field needs, Africa needs. And my best challenge, main challenge in Sanofi is to develop a big portfolio of generics because in Africa, 8% of the population can't afford the medicines, the specialist medicine. And I have a very committed social life. And I'm working with a women association, and I'm always struggling for women conditions and trying to perform in all what women are doing. And in Africa, as I said at the beginning, our main problem is education and health, really, for women. And it is very important for us to perform in these two topics before going in another one. Women are involved in business and are involved in economy, in Africa economy, but the problem is they are usually working in informal business, and unfortunately they don't take into consideration what they bring, what informal business bring. They have to be organized, they have to be working in formal organization. And I think that now things are changing, and they are more and more educated, and we fight to keep them at school. That is a big problem in Africa. When girls go to school, they stop very early, because when they are coming from rural areas or regions, nobody helps them to stay in high school because they don't find high school in their areas. So it's a big challenge for us to keep girls at school so that we can have good education women so that they can have leadership position.
Yeah, but you received a very good education, you become a doctor, and at the same time you raised 3 children.
Yes.
So let's go with the specific example of yours. What were the challenges you faced through this journey? This is also a problem, for example, for the women in Turkey. I mean, now we have a prime minister who asks women to have at least 3 children, right? And then we are here talking about to build careers. How would this happen?
I think it's just organization for me. And if you...
So Sanofi was the right address? I mean, so you made it, or were there other things which supported you?
Oh, you need courage. It's
Courage.
Courage. You know, each woman need to know that she have a role in the society. The first thing, I think that with our children, I have only one daughter. I have 2 boys and 1 daughter. But for education, I try to make them in the equal position. In my house, boys do what women do. For me, it's not only my daughter going in the kitchen or doing the table for it. For me, we are equal. We can do everything and all together. So I think it's the first thing. Maybe we received the same education because my generation, we told us that women have to be the laundry, women have to cook, women have to, and the boys never enter kitchen.
That's very important. That's a very important point, yes.
Basically,
how you raise your sons make a huge difference in the future of the society.
Of course. If you want to change things in the future, we have to start with our children. For me, it starts in family, it starts in the education, and even at school, they have to put them in same position. And of course, things will change, I'm sure.
Let me see, how many of you have sons here? Yeah. You agree? Or is it the way around? Like we raise them like so-called sultans, huh? Yes or no? Yes or no? No. Okay, that's the joke. I mean, most women try to raise their sons like so-called sultans.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Not anymore, huh? Okay, Gloria, you also made your way through. I mean, you also, let's say, received your education in the United States, one of the very good universities of the world, and you become a very successful woman in your country. How did you make it? And what were the problems that you faced through your journey? Oops.
Okay, mine is an interesting story. I am the firstborn of 5 siblings. My father passed on when I was 14, and my mother when I was in my first year of university. My mother had worked her way from an agricultural background, a poor agricultural background, to owning her own business, which is the business I run to this day, of furnishings and carpet. So when she passed on, I was in my first year in university, I was left with the role of continuing to run this business and looking after 4 siblings.
Yes.
So,
Kind of mother to them.
Exactly. So I had to grow up in fast forward. I went to school, I finished, came back to Uganda, and took the mantle and started to run the business. So I cannot say that I chose this path. It chose me. But along the way, I started to enjoy it, I started to make it better, and I started to open other businesses of my own. It's been a while, I feel like I've been working forever, but it's been a very good journey, most of which I attribute to the teachings from my mother. She died young, but left a wealth of knowledge to us that got to know her, she always said life was a choice. So every hour, every day, we make a choice. You either wake up in the morning or you don't. You take the first step or you don't. Entrepreneurship is a lot like that. It is a choice you make. If I want to build a small cottage industry, should I take the step to do it? Shouldn't I? So in a way, going back to what Emmy says, we need to teach our children. I have 2 sons, young as they are, I still try to tell them they can do whatever they put their minds to, and they can achieve whatever they put their minds to. I believe in that whatever any of us puts our minds to and believes in ourselves, like Ali Akar said, it comes from within.
Yes.
Yes, you can do it as long as you believe in yourself. So this path I didn't choose. Most probably I would have been an academician somewhere. It chose me because of the fact that I was a firstborn and I had to pick up the mantle. But I think I've done good with it. I have made it grow. And I have set standards for the younger generation in my country to look up to and to learn and know that you're just not a mother or a domestic maker, but you can be anything you put your mind to.
Do you also believe that what you're deprived of are the things that you also struggle more?
Pardon?
Do you think that when you're deprived of something, you struggle for it even more?
Yes, I do. But also, it depends in what context you look at it. I believe in the greater good for the majority. So as long as whatever we strive for is not out of selfishness, it will go a long way. It shouldn't be I. It should be we. And that way, as a mother, the mother of the nation, we are the ones that care, that groom, that raise. We will have a better world, a more peaceful world, with less issues like we're seeing today. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Carolina. How about yours? What was your journey?
Back home, a lot of people, Sedef, are telling me to write my story. I did not realize that I will be telling my story in Istanbul. But thank you for the opportunity. I can relate to many of the things that Gloria said. My mother also raised 6 siblings, and my father waited for her to be done with the raising of the children, or the siblings, for 10 years before they got married. I'm also the firstborn in a family of 4, and I felt that as the eldest in the family, I needed to be a good role model for my siblings. So I could not disappoint my parents. I felt I could not disappoint them because it would not be a good model. And I told you that I wanted to be a lawyer, but instead I trained to become a diplomat, but that did not also happen. I went into academe. And I switched. Because I had a lot of training in international relations and foreign service, and because I wanted to be an academic, I thought that I needed to understand political philosophy and understand political science. So I went to Duke University for a PhD in political science in the field of political philosophy. But martial law was imposed on the country. And I said to myself, what good would this political philosophy be? And as a consequence, I dropped out from Duke University, and I decided to go into comparative politics and to study the military in politics. And people would ask me, why? Are you married to a soldier? No. Is your father an officer? No. Why did you want to study the military in politics? Because I thought it's going to have a long-term implication for the future of my country. I love my country very much. This is why, in spite of opportunities to live abroad, I had always come home. to hopefully to make a difference, but I'm not sure that I have made any difference. So, okay, as a woman, it probably was a very good idea to be a professor at the university because I was able to choose the time when I will be at the university and therefore to raise 5 children, only one of whom is a female. She's a lawyer. Like the histories, personal history shared with us by Gloria and Amy, I also try to not raise my sons as sultans. They know how to do women's work. My second son is a very good chef. Yeah, very good chef. And when we travel and visit relatives and friends in other countries, they would compete to keep us if we would not be staying in hotels because all the children know how to behave in another person's place and to be helpful, and they would know how to do all kinds of jobs. I think it also helped that my country also removed the gender-specific tasking that older generation Filipinos were exposed to. So the sons learned home economics. They learned how to operate in the kitchen, and the only daughter learned how to do carpentry work. So the roles that they were taught to do in school and in the home were not very gender specific. So they can operate in all kinds of environments. But as a female, I was made to, as a female who trained in military and politics, when coup attempts were made against the 2 presidents, I was roped in to be a member of the investigating body. And in the first commission, I was the only woman. And I was very lucky because the 4 men who were in the commission happened to be married to very strong women. So they were used to being around strong women. But, you know, that's another story for another day's telling. You asked me earlier if I am considered a model, a role model in my country. I am not sure, but those colleagues of mine, younger colleagues obviously, that decided to go into academia and also to go into policy advocacy, you know, in governance and other kinds of things. They mention me as their mentor in gatherings and a role model, but I'm not sure. I really am not sure.
But we are hoping that you are one of these, because role models are very important. What you put in front of the society makes a huge difference in shaping the future.
I hope, you know, as I said, I'm not sure, but I hope so, because I had pictured myself as trying to live a useful life, a life that is not useful only for myself, but also for the society. And yeah,
I think that's the difference.
Continues.
Look at the way women are talking. We're talking about embracing. We're talking about we instead of I. Imagine like a group of like top team male executives here. I made it. I made it. But that's the difference. Like, that's why we should have more women in business life. If we're talking about more women in political life, then we talk more about peace. When we the number of women more in the business life, maybe we'll be talking about more of being a team, more of collaboration and so on. Even the wording has signs of this. The way you present yourself, the wording, the words that you're choosing, even this shows us that the way women are looking at the issues are way different than the men looking at the issues. Thank you very much. And then for this final round, and then maybe we get some questions from our audience, Let's have a projection for the coming future. How do you see the future, like the near future, let's say? Or if you wish, you can also have a projection for a longer term, like 20, 25 years or so. There is a big turmoil going on in Egypt. What is your perspective for the coming years, Hala? And in this regards, of course, whether there is hope or what kind of promising things are likely to happen in parallel to this coming changes.
I mean, in terms of hope, I think for the first time we're really seeing true change. So that is very hopeful and that's very positive. The immediate present spells out a lot of challenges, similar to any situation where you aspire for a much better future. But let me go first more global, and then if I have time, I may be able to talk about Egypt. The New World Order, the New World Order really is about planet Earth. And what's happening is that we are rapidly depleting our resources. We have used natural resources in the past century, equal and more than what we have used throughout humanity combined. So, and what is interesting, we are going to face for the first time the results of good work and productivity is really at a very high cost. So if you, there has been a study made recently by the United Nations, and they have for the first time introduced the wealth index. And that index shows at what cost have you achieved the productivity that you have achieved. And the result, and I will not go into a lot of details because I assume we don't have a lot of time, the result is there won't be much resource if we continue at the same pace. If we continue using the same traditional approach to doing business. And the second interesting statistic was that after the 2008 meltdown, what have companies done? They have resolved to the more traditional management approach. So women in senior positions have actually gone down over the year between 2009 and 2010 because of the fear of the repercussion of the 2008. So fear made senior management go back to all traditional, all boys, all men approach. Now, as you know, scientifically there is a difference between men and women. The difference between humankind racially, culturally, is insignificant. The difference between humankind sexually is amazing. So men and women are fundamentally different, but very complementing. It is the time that women needs to be included, because studies have also shown that board of directors with at least 3 women on the board had profitability and bottom line up to 73% higher than similar companies with less than 3 women on the board. So there is evidence that having diversity, gender diversity, is a lot more beneficial and comes with very creative approaches, which is what we will need, and realize the need sooner rather than later would be much better. And in my opinion, the only way to do it is to cut through and introduce legislation and incentives. Quotas for women on boards is imperative, in my opinion. Incentives such as, laws that require any company that's registered on the stock market have a report on gender diversity is also imperative. Incentives like my friend Wendy was suggesting, tax incentives, the same. If you look at all countries, US included, loan portfolio breakdown for all companies that are managed by men, companies that are that are headed by all men boards, constitute more than 80% of the recipients of financial support. These have to change, and they don't have to change because we want to be more productive, which is in itself important, by being more inclusive, which again is a very good reason, but actually for our survival.
Yes, we're talking about the new world and the change in economy. On one hand, we're talking about innovation, environment-friendly production. They're talking about all these changing laws and so on. But then we cannot keep the traditional way of look at women in the business. So this should also be changed.
Absolutely. And I mean, women by nature, by being instinctively a mother, is about sustainability and protection. And the earth will require a lot of sustainability, in addition to efficiency and your normal, growth and productivity indices.
Not only for the sake of women, but for the sake of being more productive.
For the sake of survival, actually.
Survival.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amy, what is your projection for the coming future?
For the coming future, I think that we should work together, women and men, and I think that we don't have to, none of them have to take, to change the nature of things. I think that we are different, it's sure. And we have natural things women can do and natural things men have to do. But what is important is to try to I don't know how to equilibre, to find the middle situation that everybody can live happily, can do what he wants, and we have to respect the difference between one and men and women. I always say that we are different. And the difference is something very important. Diversity is something important for every topics. And in the future, if each of us try to succeed on all what we are doing, I think that things will change. For me, it's not time for struggling. Now, everybody know what is the problem. Everybody knows the solution, but we are always struggling. I think that we waste time, always struggling. What we try to do is...
Waste of energy.
Yes, what we need to do is how to be together to make things happen and to make things better than what we are doing now. And the word is, we are living globalization in the world. Globalization for me, it's not only country from country, north from south, and no, it's the human globalization. We need all together to work for our world to be better than what it was. We really waste time fighting conflicts, war, and everything. Even war, the problem of war is it's just not understanding it's other. All my youth, I spent it in an association called CISV, Children International Summer Villages. It was created by an American psychologist because after the Second War, her children asked to her, because on television they only show war. And he asked to the grandmother, to the mother, if he has to be a soldier when he grows up. And it was the declic for the woman. She said that we have to do something. And CISV is only building friendship. If we try to know each other, if we try to understand others' culture, others' religion, others' way of behavior, maybe we can live friendly, and we can it's sure that if we spend our time trying to perform, trying to do things together, we will grow faster than trying to struggle. I'm a man, I should be here. You're a woman, you should be here. I think it's a real problem. For me, the main problem is this. We have to respect each other in our difference. And our difference is, for me, it's rich and it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you. Gloria, how do you see the future?
I think